in terms of, I will use the term psychosexual narrative. I mean, the whole story of the Exodus is a nation that is in a confined area that passes through a watery passage and goes out into the wide open land. It is metaphorically, and one could argue literally, the birth of a nation.
Hey everyone, welcome or welcome back to Eating the Apple, a podcast where two non-believers take an honest look at the Bible. I'm Jeff.
I'm Chris.
And today we're pleased and honored to be joined by Rabbi Geoffrey Dennis, leader of Congregation Kol Ami in Flower Mound, Texas. He's the author of two books, The Encyclopedia of Jewish Myth, Magic, and Mysticism, and Sefer HaBahir, Selections from the Book of Brilliance. Rabbi Dennis, welcome to Eating the Apple.
I'm delighted to be with you both, Chris, Jeff, and with your audience. This is a delight and a privilege for me.
Awesome. If you wouldn't mind just kind of expounding on some more of your plaudits.
I serve a small congregation in North Texas, in the DFW area, but that also allows me the latitude to pursue other things. So I have been an instructor in Jewish studies at the University of North Texas for a quarter century. I've also been a police chaplain. I write quite a bit, as suggested. Aside from my two books, I've written quite a number of encyclopedia entries, academic and popular articles, things like that.
Well, thank you. Well, we brought you on, as you already know, to discuss the Passover. We've finally come to the point that all of the plagues have been visited upon the people of Egypt in an attempt to scare the Pharaoh into letting the Israelites go, and that's true. Mm-hmm. But so now we wanted to gain a deeper understanding of this festival that still has a presence
Sure.
in our modern time. So without further ado, I'll get into Exodus 12:1 here, where the Lord says to Moses and Aaron, "This is going to be a month. This is we are now establishing your first month, and go back and tell the community that on the 10th day of this month, everyone's supposed to take a lamb into their household," and basically continues on with all the other instructions. So get a lamb. If the family's too small for an entire lamb, share that lamb. And here's how it has to be without defect. Do you have any notes,
right.
Rabbi, on like what without defect?
No blemish, no injured limbs, no lesions, no significant injuries to either the deep body or the superficial body. That's the premise.
Gotcha.
And is that just because this is supposed to be for the Lord?
Yes, that's precisely right.
Okay.
And you can see in later prophetic writings, rabbis who criticize Israelites who make offerings of, second-tier herd animals to God and keep the best for themselves. So
right.
It is, a little concern that Israelites, in an effort to be economical, may do a little sleight of hand when it comes to God.
And also in 12:6, the instruction is to take care of them until the 14th day. Is it possible that those 4 days are spent checking for these defects, or
exactly.
is
it? Sometimes it takes a while to find out that someone is pregnant. Sometimes it takes a little while to figure out that this particular lamb actually has a what, when I was a nurse, we used to call subclinical problem, right? Something that hasn't manifested itself yet. So gotcha. The 3 days of observation allow for something unanticipated to manifest itself.
Understood. Very good. Okay, and so then at twilight of the 14th day, that's when you're to slaughter the animal, take some hyssop, and dip the hyssop in the blood. Sorry, Chris.
Can I jump in real quick? Because I noticed when we do this, we typically check a bunch of different Bible translations and stuff.
Sure.
And some of them say at twilight, and some of them say between the two evenings. Does that have a specific meaning?
Yeah, no. I think that, look, at every translator is a traitor. And whenever you're looking at an English translation, you're smart to look at multiple translations to see what detectable issues are going on. I always say that translating from Hebrew to English is like switching from a color TV to a black and white TV.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because the Hebrew carries nuances, connotations, double entendres, things in the original language that cannot be replicated in English. And therefore, the translator makes a choice and something is lost.
Right.
But that being said, I would say that twilight of that day is the correct answer, between
Okay.
somewhere around the area of sunset.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out if it meant then or, during the day, between the two
Now,
days or whatever. So
it may be a reflection of later Jewish tradition, because rabbis always try and, this is a commandment, a mitzvah in the Torah, and the rabbis always try and provide what I would call regs. That is, regulations to help you fulfill this. And therefore, it may be an allusion to the idea that in rabbinic tradition, you have some latitude. The sun may still be up. The sun may have already gone down, but you still are within the time frame to do this act. So that may be a reflection of later Jewish practice.
Very interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
So that's 12:6 and 12:7. They're to take the collected blood from the slaughter, dip some hyssop in it, and wipe it around the doorframe of their the entryway to their
Nothing
dwelling.
strange about that.
Right. And so, speaking of nothing strange, it's almost as if they took this modern interpretations of taking this sort of weird thing and added to it. Rabbi David Foreman, whose Parshat Companions I've been reading, says that we could interpret this as being like a symbol of the birthing process. They're being reborn, and here they are coming through a bloody canal, if you will.
Right.
What have you ever exposited or read anything about that?
Now digressions. We can go.
Let's do it. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
Many of the commandments offer no rationale for why we do them, which really opens the door for us to give a rationale. And there are multiple rationales that come, and that actually is one of the major engines for Jewish interpretation, is the Bible does not tell us, therefore we're going to step into that gap and we're going to offer explanations. Rabbi Foreman's interpretation is a perfectly good one. In terms of, I will use the term psychosexual narrative. I mean, the whole story of the Exodus is a nation that is in a confined area that passes through a watery passage and goes out into the wide open land. It is metaphorically, and one could argue literally, the birth of a nation. And therefore, Rabbi Foreman's interpretation of the use of the blood as analogous to or alluding to the blood of birth is a perfectly plausible one. It's not one that I've actually ever heard before, but I give him kudos. That's a good one. I tend to fall back on the more very traditional, quasi-magical interpretation that goes like this, and that is the word for Passover, Pesach, actually means protection. And in the proper fancy word in the anthropology of religion is apotropaic. That is something that will protect you not only against physical threats, but spiritual threats. And so putting the blood on the lintels of the houses is a way of making sure that the destroyer, which is the word used in the Bible, the destroyer will pass over the house. It's a kind of amulet or talisman. Now that's one perfectly good. I think it's my personal favorite interpretation. But I will add one more, and that is that many rabbis starting in the Middle Ages pointed out that in Egyptian polytheism, a lamb is a deified animal. It represents a god. And therefore, by slaughtering a lamb, you're sort of giving a nanny nanny boo boo to the Egyptians. And then by putting the blood on your door, you are visibly declaring your allegiance. You're saying which side you're on. And
Wow.
if that doesn't work, if it doesn't do what was promised, there could be serious consequences for that. So there's
Gotcha.
multiple layers of meaning to this particular practice. Let me add one more thing because I love to digress. No, let's make it two.
I have one too.
Right. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Let's see. One is that the very fact that Exodus 12 begins with declaring the first month, the first instruction that God gives to the Israelites is actually what their calendar should look like. And that's a very interesting declaration, so that's worth noting. And the second is that the medieval French commentator Rashi reacts to the fact that the Torah begins with the creation of the world, and that shouldn't need any comment, but he does comment. He says, by all logic, since the Torah is meant for the people Israel, why don't we start the Torah on Exodus 12? Where the people get their first commandments. This would be the logical place to start. And Rashi then uses that as an excuse to say, well, God tells us that God is the sovereign and author of the universe in order to establish his bona fides for telling us things, right? So by God saying he created the heavens and the earth, who is to argue with him? And he says, take some hyssop and smear blood on your doorstep. It may seem weird, but, when God says it, we do it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, speaking of digressions, do you happen to know anything about the pre-rabbinic tradition of the Passover?
Yeah, well, we know a great deal, though not as much as we would like. Clearly, the first Passover is unique, and in fact, some of the commandments associated with our time in Egypt go out of application after it because we're never going to be in Egypt again. But most of it is understood to be at least partially centered in the temple. And we have different evidence about how this was practiced. Now, probably the most controversial thing, I don't consider it controversial, but others may, is the whole concept of the Seder, the sort of symposium-like dinner that Jews do to honor the Passover, is in fact a post-biblical practice. All the elements, the many customs, the unusual things that go on are actually the creation of post-biblical rabbinic Judaism. And so if we were to pull a random example out of the Christian Bible, Jesus having a dinner with his followers at what now is known as the Last Supper, seems to be doing a quasi-Seder. Maybe, maybe not. It all depends on the timing. But we can see that it is a very stripped-down affair. And a lot of the things going on at the table of his time are elaborated on later. So it's really a very minor affair in its temple existent time. Much of what goes on before that is about sacrifices in the temple. So you have to bring what's called a hagiga, that is a lamb to be sacrificed for the holiday. Hag is a holiday, so a hagiga is a holiday sacrifice. And so while you may be slaughtering a lamb at home, you are also sending a lamb to the central area of worship, and it is being sacrificed on behalf of the old people. So we do know something about what was practiced beforehand, and mostly the things we do now were completely unfamiliar to Jews in the 2nd century BCE, in the 1st century BCE, in the time of Jesus. It was a much more streamlined affair.
Yeah, we would expect, so much time to pass, things would evolve.
Oh, always.
Yeah.
And so you brought it right back around to another digression on the topic of the lamb. Throughout the centuries of exegesis, folks have extracted all these different meanings.
Right.
You mentioned Jesus, and to this day, modern day Christians look at this story as a basis for the sacrificial
the Lamb of Christ. Yes.
Correct.
Yes,
yeah. And so I'm just wondering if there's anything that we could kind of pull from this to relate to like modern Christianity as it is.
Sure. The first thing Jews think about this, because we see it all the time, which is the creation and performance of Christian satyrs. This is problematic from our perspective for several reasons. One, most of the practices, as I said, came into existence after the time of Jesus. So
Right.
Drinking 4 cups of wine or breaking a middle matzah or any of those things are actually post-Jesus. And therefore, we should not assume that he was doing any of these things. But the second problem is that if you dissect and deconstruct the 4 different gospels. And I want to praise Christianity for having 4 different gospels because it recognizes a kind of hermeneutic humility that no one knows everything that happened. And so we have 4 different witnesses reporting 4 different versions of this. And one of the obvious things that Jews notice is that the synoptic gospels place the Last Supper on the night where we would have a Passover Seder, but the Gospel of John sets it the day before. And specifically, Gospel of John does that because it wants the reader to associate Jesus with the sacrificial lamb.
Right.
Yeah.
Because he is slaughtered before the holiday. And so the idea of Jesus as the Lamb of God comes directly from John. It is not an idea that really, as far as I know, manifests itself in the Synoptic Gospels.
Very good. Okay, so we're painting the lintels of our doors with blood, and we're also that night supposed to eat this roasted lamb that's been essentially there are prescriptions for how to slaughter it. Basically, you don't slaughter it. You basically prepare it in a way that is meant to imply hastiness, right? So
that may be an interpretation. The general Jewish understanding is that the animal would have been slaughtered in the practices associated with the temple. And so there would have been a slaughter. Okay. It would have been based on what we today do in kashrut with food, the animals that we eat to this day. And that consists of, again, this is a retrojection. All these rules did not exist in biblical times. But the understanding would have been that you want to slice the animal's neck completely through the windpipe, the jugular, and the carotid with a single stroke in order to cause minimum suffering, and then allow the animal to bleed out. Hypovolemic shock will set in almost immediately, and then you prepare the animal from there. Did our Israelite ancestors understand that? Were they as meticulous about that? Probably not. But yeah, the animal's definitely slaughtered. It's more about how it's cooked.
See, I can't find it now, but there was a note that I read that said that it was the roasting it whole was in line with the traditions of the wandering.
Yes. So there's a couple of things you are allowed, and the primary is that you basically want to do I don't know, barbacoa. You
Yeah.
want to cook it whole, maybe dig a pit and put in some ashes and cook it like people do now when they want to make a barbecue.
Mhm.
So that was the principle, and part of it was, I think, again, the Bible does not explain itself.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I think it was meant to invoke how you would be doing it in the wilderness.
Interesting. Again, this is my own interpretation, but it seems as if like you're not supposed to boil it in water. These are prescriptions from the text itself. Don't boil it in water.
Right.
Don't eat it raw. These are meant to
Right.
cook it still, but don't remove the organs. We're not trying to dress this in any way. We're trying to just we
Yeah.
need to cook it and eat it. That type of thing. So, but what you're saying obviously makes a whole lot more sense.
Yeah.
So also, you're supposed if there's any left over, you're meant to burn it. And what do you know if there's any purpose
Right.
behind
Well,
not leaving
God
anything?
hates leftovers. Okay.
Sacrifice your leftovers.
Yeah. No. One could make the practical argument that leaving meat overnight, even if it's cooked, could begin the process of it turning foul. So you want to either consume it or destroy it after it's been out for a certain length of time. That's a very utilitarian answer.
Gotcha.
I think from the perspective of the Bible, it probably has more to do with the idea that you don't neglect the sacrifice given to God.
That was what I was going to say. That's how I read it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Personally.
Yeah, there are lots of utilitarian arguments about food consumption and how Jewish tradition works. But as my rabbi used to point out when I was in seminary, there are no rules against any sort of vegetation, eating any sort of vegetation. And those are among the deadliest things out there. So it's not about hygiene, or it's not about keeping you safe. It is a ritual practice.
Wow. Very good. Okay, so you're also supposed to eat it with your cloak tucked into your belt,
Yes.
with your sandals on, and with your
Yes.
staff in your hand. Is this
Right.
also meant to just imply hastiness?
Yes, it's absolutely. Well, yeah, you should be ready to leave at a moment's notice. This is one of the commandments that falls into abeyance after the first celebration, because there's no need for it. Now, that doesn't mean you can't honor it. And in fact, any number of Jewish communities around the world still have something like this custom. And you can go to, for example, I think it's Yemen. The Jews of Yemen will literally stand up with their cloaks and their staffs, and they will walk around the table. It's a sort of as a mimetic performance of the idea of Exodus. I am a very modern person, so I do it in a very different way. I always wear hiking boots. So at the Seder. So that is my nod to this now no longer applicable commandment.
And instead of the staff, do you have your trekking poles ready to go?
I should have a trekking pole. I do not. I have a number of useful trekking poles, but I've never gone that far.
So on the same night that all of these things transpire, God is going to he's going to come through Egypt and strike down every firstborn, both people and animals, and bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt.
Yes.
What does that mean? How is he going to judge the gods of Egypt?
Good. So again, go back to the original word Pesach, protect. I'm not going to put too fine a point on it. All ancient people in their religious practice expected their deity to protect them and to shield them in some way. We today, having studied Immanuel Kant and looked at many other things, we tend to be very hesitant about claiming that God is going to mechanistically intervene to protect us. But I'm sure both the Egyptians and the ancient Israelites believed that idea. So by killing the firstborn, there's a couple of things that happen out of that. The first one is simply that it demonstrates the impotence of the Egyptian gods. They cannot protect you. They cannot save you. So that's the immediate point. But it also is an interesting element of something. We don't have the word karma in the Hebrew Bible, but the idea of what goes around comes around. is very much, or sometimes it's more fancily called biblical symmetry, happens all the time. And having sentenced all the Israelite firstborn, or the male children, to die in the Nile, which was the Egyptian thing, God, just with a kind of dark sense of humor, turns that around on the Egyptians and kills their firstborn. It's horrific. It's terrible, but it is meant to be understood as a kind of karma.
Yeah, I was just about to bring up a short digression on that in terms of the way the plagues play out. Kind of, we talked about it in previous podcasts. It almost seems like it's God getting retribution on the Egyptians rather than redeeming His people. And I wanted to see if you
so
speak on that a little bit.
Part of, in the effort to demonstrate the powerlessness of the Egyptian gods,
right,
God is going to bring a progressive series of sanctions on the Egyptians and afflict them, and they are going to increasingly understand that there is no Egyptian God who's going to save them. The only God is the God of Israel. It's a very interesting list, and many arguments and naturalistic arguments about why this thing happens or that thing happens. You know, sometimes it's red soil from Upper Egypt flows down and makes the water red. That drives the frogs out onto the shore. That causes the frogs die, and that draws flies, and all kinds of things have been argued. But it seems to be meant, I think it's meant, to be seen as miraculous, and we should accept it as such. Now, another digression, God, I can't resist. And when it talks about frogs as a plague, it doesn't say frogs in the plural. It says Siphardea, frog. All right? So shouldn't we correctly interpret this as some kind of gigantic kaiju frog? You know, that like Godzilla roams across the territory of Egypt, smashing buildings and sending people fleeing in terror. You know, the tradition recognizes that, and then it splits the difference. It says one gigantic kaiju frog that gives birth to hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of frogs. So, but in any case, you know, the rabbis are brilliant at the close reading of the text. They notice things that you and I simply don't notice, and so that becomes an occasion for them to expound on it.
Yeah. It definitely, it's food for thought here. It hadn't occurred to me that we talked last episode that it hasn't come out yet about the why is God inflicting this upon all of the Egyptians instead of just the people in control of letting the Jews go or whatever, but doing this as a ramp up to show them that their gods have no power is interesting. We kind of touched on that, but I hadn't connected it.
Key to all of this, and of course Pharaoh, who himself styles himself as a god, is also subject to this. It is a complicated question about why the general population is suffering. We experience all kinds of things as blunt instruments, and apparently God sometimes has a little difficulty, doing precision strikes on the deepest offenders. The best I can offer you for this is Abraham Joshua Heschel, who once said regarding the Germans and the Holocaust, he said, "A few are guilty, but all are responsible." And the idea that in a society, especially a modern society, where people do have both personal and political influence, people have a say. And presumably, I think he would say that the ancient Egyptians had a say in the fate of the Israelites also. So that's why they get caught up in the net of all of this. It's an arguable point, and many Jews are aware that God is really bringing the hammer down, and maybe people who we would consider to be innocent of all of this are caught in the net or caught under.
Fair enough. We'll have to remember that phrase whenever we get to when we get to the Israelites plundering the Egyptians here in a little bit. That while they might not all be guilty, they're all certainly responsible. Okay, so moving on to 12:15, the Lord prescribes that they, for the next 7 days.
Is that the giving of the Magna Carta?
Say again?
Is that the giving of the Magna Carta?
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm kidding. I'm sorry.
I think it is. I think this, yeah,
my mind just picks up these numbers and runs with them. Go ahead.
Well, I think this takes place in 12:15, the year 12:15.
The verse, yes. Go ahead.
Exactly. I'm sorry. 12:15.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
So for 7 days they are to eat bread made without yeast. So we're getting to another sticking point for us. On the first day, remove yeast from your houses. For whoever eats anything without or with yeast in it from the first day through the seventh must be cut off from Israel. Right. So please. So some of the reading that we've done ranges anywhere from "we're going to forget your name" to we're calling Genesis, "we're going to kill you." So
we're going to jump past the "how can you possibly remove all the yeast from your house" to being cut off. That's fine. That's fine.
So, I was actually wanted to bring that up, though. Does it mean yeast, or does it just mean leavened bread? Because I've seen it kind of implied both ways.
So again, the meaning of the source is undetermined, but they do use the word for yeast or leaven. So presumably, any product affected by leaven, or leaven itself, we would say kal v'chomer. If all products made from leaven should be removed, then all the more so leaven should be removed. Right. Okay. It's a kind of logic exercise. So anyway, all right. So let's talk about karet. Karet appears multiple times in the Hebrew Bible, and we generally translate it as cut off from one's kin. We could use the fancy word extirpation, where you are completely removed from existence or something like that. It's pretty clear, and there's not a lot clear about this, but it's pretty clear that this is a divine punishment, not a human punishment. This is not something that's going to be implemented by a court of law. This is a judgment from God. Now, what the heck does it mean to be cut off? So many of the ideas that we have today about heaven and hell and the eternality of the soul, they are not really functional ideas, 3,000 years ago in Israelite thought. But let's imagine for a moment we're talking about physical body. Then it could mean that you're going to die prematurely. All right. But of course, oftentimes it's really hard to make that argument. The book of Job spends its entire time saying that that's an entirely wrong argument, that there really is no way to connect people's moral behavior to the consequences of their everyday life. Good people suffer, bad people thrive, et cetera, et cetera. So probably it's not meant to be premature death. So it must be some kind of spiritual death, something that happens to the soul or the spirit, however our ancestors defined that. And it is left incredibly vague. Sometimes the best threats coming from our parents work when they're incredibly vague. You better not do that. Why not? You're going to regret it.
So God's counting to 3 right here.
I'm not going to say until you do it, right? So, so the threat is incredibly vague.
Gotcha.
Over the centuries, Jews have made many attempts to understand what karet actually implies. For one tradition, it is the idea that the fate of karet is what produces ghosts. All right? And in later medieval Jewish mysticism, which believed in reincarnation, it was the idea that the transmigrating soul will be transmigrated into a lesser body, into a beast or even an inanimate object. So, these are all speculative attempts to figure out what the heck karet means. It's suffice to say that in the biblical context, it's a rather ambiguous but apparently significant threat.
Okay, very good. Let's see. So they're told to celebrate this festival because it was on this very day that their divisions were brought out of Egypt. I'm wondering if the sort of the different translations of divisions, also armies,
Right.
ranks, things like that.
Right.
Are these distinctions without differences, or?
I believe that the Hebrew word, and again, translators will try and make what they will out of it, is tsevaot.
Yep.
And tsevaot means hosts,
Ah.
or in a purely military context, armies. All right. So the hosts of Israel left. Now, the use of the word division or hosts or armies or muster, any number of words could function for tzivaot. So you pick your poison and you go with it.
Okay. So does that lend to the idea that they were prepared for war on the way out? Were they armed or?
So no, a good hermeneutic question, because tzivaot does carry the connotation of a military force. So one of the popular questions that comes out is it says that they left Egypt with their hands raised. What does that mean? All right. So it could be that meant that they were armed, that they had weapons of war in their hands, that they displayed the way warriors do to intimidate their opponents. It could be that they were feeling very nice and they were just waving goodbye to the Egyptians. Or it could have been something in the intermediate in which they were making a gesture towards the Egyptians to tell them how much contempt. I'm not going to do that because you're recording this visually. But you can read, or it could be more power to us. Again, the phrase we use in biblical studies is undetermined. It doesn't really tell us what that means. And so we have the freedom to enter into the text and make an argument for what it is. The Orthodox scholar David, where's his name gone out of my head? Anyway, a scholar that I listened to once said, was asked the question, is the Torah perfect? And his answer was, no, of course the Torah is not perfect. If it were perfect, there would be no room for me. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that the Torah often leaves us gaps or unexplained motives or behaviors or gestures or anything like that is really an invitation for us to, in a sense, complete the text to the best of our understanding. So the Torah is not perfect. It's waiting for us to make sense of it.
Very good. And that's a great question, Chris. Thank you for reminding me of that, because like here upon the Exodus,
David Hartman. It came to me. I'm old now, but it's David Hartman. All right.
They leave prepared for battle. So that's a great, Chris. That's a great.
Sure, that's a perfectly legitimate interpretation.
Okay. So we're kind of. I don't want to take too much of your time, and there's a lot more I want to get to. So,
sure.
Basically, they said that he says that when God passes through, I say God, but you've accurately already explained that in other translations it's the destroyer.
Right.
They are anyone without blood around their doorframe is going to be their firstborn is going to be killed.
This divine punishment.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So they will not permit the destroyer to enter your house and strike you down. Yeah. Right. So. It says in 1224. Is that a significant year, Rabbi?
1224. 1224. Now you got me on that one. I'm sorry. It was as far as
9 years after the Magna Carta. How's that?
Middle Ages. Yeah. Who knows? Yeah. Something was going wrong someplace.
Yeah. Obey these instructions as a lasting ordinance for you and your descendants. So is this considered this quotation? Is this considered significant? Like, is this the reason why we do this still?
For the celebration of Passover and the Seder,
right?
For 3,000 years,
mm-hmm.
We could read this, and that might be there, and we might construe that this story happened in the past, and that everything that's being accounted and described, especially for our own practice, is antiquarian. It's what we did in the past. We don't have to do it now, but actually, this manifests the idea that we must continue to tell this story, to observe some of these rituals, to honor this particular day. It is in the nature of the Bible that it only occasionally tells us something directly about what we should or shouldn't be doing.
Hmm.
And most of the time for Jews, what's important is what's repeated. In other words, what story or verse or idea gets repeated over and over again. As my Talmud teacher used to say, what story has legs? Why do we keep hearing this again and again? The classic example for Jews as compared to Christians is the story of the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve. For Christians, this is absolutely an essential story, and they will use it to make all their arguments about the nature of human anthropology, about sin and redemption and all these things. The Jews are aware that after Genesis 6, this story really never gets mentioned again.
Right.
Ever. So, the prophets, the writings, none of the Hebrew Bible ever bothers to do more than allude to the idea that there was once an ideal garden in the mythic past. So, but the Exodus, however, is mentioned almost 100 times throughout the Hebrew Bible. So from that, we learn that this is the story we need to be revisiting again and again. This is our master story.
Hence, when I visited you in your office, you had a Moses action figure hanging on your wall, so I can see how this is.
Now I've got 2 Moses action figures.
I need at least one. I don't know why I don't. I need a Moses board game or something.
Yeah, no, you definitely have to get into it. So I'm a collector, and to a disturbing degree. If you look behind me, you can see I have what I call my archive of extraordinary objects, which are all things referencing superheroes and pop culture and stuff like that. I got Appa flying up there in the sky, and I've got Wonder Woman and all of those things. I'm just a collector, so you should definitely collect Moses action figures.
I do have this Gollum board game. It's about the 15th century.
Well, actually, I was admiring. I assumed those were board games, but I didn't know. So that's good for you. Good for you.
We're all collectors, I think, in some way. We all have to, we all show our nerdhood in some way.
Yeah, we for those of us who are nerds, but those of us who have the sports gene, we collect sports memorabilia.
Yep, I definitely have some of that. Okay, so right after that passage, they say, the Lord says, and when your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you?
Right.
You're supposed to tell them the story of the Passover. Exactly. Is that where we get the modern day 4 questions?
Absolutely. We are supposed to tell them, and actually there are 4 different places where we are told we need to repeat this story to them.
Gotcha.
So that becomes the basis for the 4 questions, but also for the 4 children or the 4 sons. There's another part of the Seder where you identify there are 4 types of children that you must explain the Seder to. The wise son, the wicked son, the simple son, and the son who doesn't even know what to ask.
Gotcha.
Right? And so this represents, we have to honor the different learning modalities of our children in a way that we tell this story that is comprehensible to them.
Gotcha.
And then the questions, the whole Seder is designed around questions. Everything we do, all the weird stuff we do, the weird foods and the weird behaviors are all meant to trigger our children asking us questions. But just in case our children are so unable to ask that they won't ask the questions, we build 4 questions in. Just so we cover that. So we get a minimum 4, it's like a number of drinks at a party or at a bar, right? You got to drink a minimum of 4 drinks. You got to have 4 glasses of wine. You got to ask 4 questions. So it's all designed around inquiry.
So the destroyer passes through. There's loud wailing in all of Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. I'm assuming, is that a little bit of hyperbole there? Or
the Bible is never above hyperbole. The prophets are always telling us we're going to be utterly destroyed. And then 3 verses later, they say, but God will spare some of you. You know, so hyperbole is a perfectly reasonable feature of biblical rhetoric, and we make a mistake taking this too damn literally.
Hmm.
Right? It is just like a politician. Whenever a politician says Americans won't stand for this, we know that there are Americans that will stand for this. That's ridiculous. You can't speak for the entire nation. And likewise in the Bible, uh, everybody, including God, engages in hyperbole. And certainly the omnipotent author speaking, the voice speaking in Exodus, uses hyperbole.
Gotcha. Well, without revealing too much, how much longer we have you for, I'm going to basically just open the floor. Chris, do you have any other questions before? I'd like for you to touch on, Rabbi, before we leave, just some more of like the modern day interpretations and how that kind of influences the what we do nowadays. But Chris, if you have any like actual text specific questions.
I did have one at the beginning of chapter 13. It says, "Consecrate to me every firstborn." What exactly does that mean?
Well, it depends on what kind of living thing you're talking about.
Wait, I was referring to our children, people.
Our children, right? Okay, so but it lays into a larger motif of that. Since I brought you out of the land of Egypt, you owe me. Right. And one of the things you owe me are the firstborn, because I killed the Egyptian firstborn, and I did that for you. Therefore, you have a debt, and that debt is represented by the firstborn. It can be a firstborn human, but it's also the firstborn cattle. Now, if it's cattle, there's two options. You can either dedicate that firstborn animal, a firstborn calf, it's kosher, to the temple. They can have their own herd if they want, or something like that. Or if it's an animal like a horse or a donkey, you actually have to break its neck. I'm sorry, neck. I know I don't want to bring up this ugly past for you, but
it's already broken.
Right? So, but
you were consecrated.
I am, but for human beings, the rule is this. Probably in biblical times, you had two options. You could either literally, actually donate your child to the service in the temple, which is what we see in the story of Samuel, in the beginning of 1 Samuel, right, where Hannah brings her son and gives him over to Eli. So that's an option. But the other option is what in Jewish tradition we call pidyon haben, the redemption of the firstborn son. And what that consists of is coming before a priest and saying, yeah, I know he belongs to you, but I like him, I'd like to keep him, and therefore here, have some money. So you make a donation to the priest or the temple or whatever, and that allows you to keep your firstborn son who has been dedicated, right? But the idea is that we need to be ever conscious of the fact that God went to the most extreme steps in order to liberate us, and therefore that accountability sticks with us through the ages.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I don't know what you had planned, Jeff, but I was going to say, if any of our viewers have any other questions or want to learn more, is there some place you can point them to continue this other than the text? Or
gosh, we Jews, well, first of all, we create great books and we create fantastic websites. We're very good at this. And so, I mean, I know that probably most of your audience is younger than me, and they don't really understand what a book or a magazine is. So let me suggest they look at web pages. And the web pages I go to immediately would be the Jewish Library, which is a website, Judaism 101, and the Union for Reform Judaism website. All of them have virtually any question. You can put in a search engine question, and it will take you to an article or a essay about that thing, and you can learn a great deal just from doing that. If you're an old coot like me, you might want to pick up a book. So I don't know, Settings of Silver by Stephen Whalen or Essential Judaism by Robinson. Those are both excellent reference books.
I'll definitely include all of the links to those websites and notes regarding the books in the show notes of the episode. Rabbi, if you wouldn't mind, just occupy the the rest of the time you're willing to give us with the way we recognize the Passover nowadays, and the way it's been accepted.
So once the temple is destroyed, and that major feature of Jewish worship, which could have potentially spelled the end of the Jewish people. I mean, we have put so much emphasis on the importance of having a temple and going to make offerings to the temple. We would have,
Are you talking first or second temple? Or does it matter?
Either one. But I mean, we lost the first temple. We were able to recover from that primarily because we were able to identify certain ideas that tided us over. So, for example, Hosea says that the words of my lips will serve as bulls, meaning that our prayers can substitute for actual sacrifices. And then with the destruction of the second temple, we again lost what we thought was our central route of communication with God. But in fact, we had already developed the synagogue at that point. We had already recognized certain substitutes for sacrifice, tzedakah or charitable donations, the contrition of our hearts, and acts of loving kindness. All of these were understood to stand in the place of sacrifices. However, this is a very big ritual, the sacrifices for Passover. So starting in a book called the Mishnah, Rabban Gamliel starts to define how we can celebrate this holiday in the absence of the temple. And he starts talking about things like, well, you want to have a lamb bone there, right, to remind us of that. And you want to have matzah on your table because that is part of the original ceremony. You want to have bitter herbs. And he says, if you don't mention these three things, you have not really honored Passover. And then it is from that, I would describe it like a grain of sand popping into an oyster. As soon as that sand is in there, and Rabban Gamliel says that, everybody starts adding things around it. And the tradition grows and grows and grows, and now we have a very elaborate home ritual that didn't exist 2,000 years ago, by which we honor and remember this. From some people, especially if they're of the fundamentalist vein, they'll be troubled by that. Because these would be what Jesus referred to as the traditions of men. But I would say this to your audience. We all use the Bible as the foundation of our religion, but no one lives in a foundation. We live in a house built on a foundation. And just as Judaism has many rituals that are extended from the Bible, expanding on the Bible, elaborating on the Bible, so too Christians do the same thing. And, there may be one allusion to the Trinity in the New Testament. There is no allusion to the Trinity whatsoever in the Hebrew Bible, despite attempts to claim that certain odd phrasing implies the Trinity. So we build new ideas to continue our tradition and allow us to celebrate it in the way we think it should be celebrated. So that's what Jews have done. We are always adding new elements to our celebration. And it says in the Passover Haggadah, the book, the story from which we read, it says, anyone who elaborates on the story of the going forth from Egypt is to be praised. And so we take that seriously. We're going to elaborate on this as much as possible.
Well, we will do our best to contribute to that, however meager. Those are extremely wise words. I think I just became a Jew. Is that possible?
We can fix this. No, anything, it's not your fault. You weren't born Jewish, but it is solvable.
Right.
A simple dip and clip. and you're in.
I've been through it.
It's the major test we have to see if someone's really sincere. So,
oh yeah, exactly. All right. Well, Rabbi, thank you so much for your time. If there's nothing else, I think if it's okay with you, we're going to Chris and I are going to continue a little bit. We're going to finish the text. But until you and I speak again, I really wanted to say that I really appreciate your time and your continued willingness to be so available and so open.
As we say in Hebrew, my zechut, it's my privilege, it's my honor, it's my merit to be able to participate in this conversation.
Well, Rabbi Geoffrey Dennis, thank you so much. And if you'd like, just feel free to leave the chat, and Chris and I will continue.
Will do.
Until next time.
All blessings.
Thank you very much.
Likewise. All right. Just Chris.
Wow,
and I.
that was awesome.
Yeah.
That was incredible.
Very edifying. Before we continue on with the text, did you want to expound or elaborate on anything that was said there?
No, I was just I was a little bit surprised by how much information he was able to give in such a small amount of time. That was really good. I appreciated that a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. And man, the good questions. Thank you so much for raising those questions. Now that we are absent Rabbi Dennis, I just wanted to add an additional thank you to him and for his time and the effort that he put forth answering our silly little questions. But
very much so.
Yeah, I really hope to continue our private conversations and hopefully have him back if he's ever willing.
If we weren't constrained for time, he brought up Christians kind of inserting Satan into stuff. And I did find an outside thing in Jubilees. There is a direct allusion to Satan being the destroyer.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah. And would you mind? So you've shown the book that you're reading right now about Satan. Would you mind mentioning it out loud? Because
sure.
Like the title and author, because
it's called The Satan: How God's Executioner Became the Enemy, and it like I said, I haven't finished it. I'm only part way through, but it starts out lining out what Satan used to be, and kind of it's moving towards what Satan became, and essentially it's it talks about I can't remember exactly where in the book or in the Bible, but it talks about Satan meeting somebody on the road and being ready to execute them, and then God staying his hand and things like that. And that, like I said before, that's where I got the right hand illusions. And it's really good if you're interested in it. I don't, if Satan's not your thing or whatever, then, I would say you don't need to read it, but it is very interesting if anybody's interested in that idea of how, the serpent in the Garden of Eden became Satan, and how Satan became, this master of evil that's been to be chained and then released and everything else. This is actually the second. If I had known that, I would have bought the first one first. But this is the second book that he's written on it. But this one is kind of more of the mechanical, how it happened, not what happened.
How it happened, how the transition, how like the retrojections and etiologies of like the present day incarnation of Satan has been kind of like retrofitted to fit these different characters throughout the Bible.
Exactly.
And
cool. When we get into more, like maybe when we cover Job or some of the other parts of the New Testament stuff, I'd like to see if we can get him on board.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
Heck yeah, man. We need more contributors because we're just two stupid atheists. Well, one stupid atheist. And
I got to tell you, today made me feel stupid in the best possible way.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. And like honestly, like all the amount of doors that were opened in front of me. I'm like, man. So we've gone over some of the restriction or some of the prescriptions. Now let's talk about some of the restrictions. That no foreigner may eat the Passover meal.
Yeah, that's another thing I wanted to bring up again with the time constraint and everything, because he did mention the Christian kind of version of the Passover Seder, and I was invited to one of those, but I was under the impression that it was the real deal. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize there was a second. So a little bit more information on that. I'm gonna have to look into it.
it's kind of like you said too. Like everyone has their own interpretation of how to do. Like these are kind of loose. There's no like real like prescribed hard prescriptions on this. It's kind of like, but yeah, you're right. The time constraints. Damn it. Would have loved to have asked that. Any slave that's brought may eat the Passover meal after they've been circumcised, but a temporary resident or a hired worker may not eat the Passover.
Yeah, and that it kind of just going one little verse further or whatever. It says the same law applies to both the native born and the foreigner residing among you, but it just says the foreigner residing among you, like the foreigners are not allowed. So I'm not entirely sure how that's supposed to play out.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And let's see. Oh, so anyone who wants to celebrate the Passover meal has to have all of the males in their house circumcised, and then they may take part. But no one who is uncircumcised may eat the lamb, like you said. And then it said at the very end of Exodus 12, on the very day the Lord brought the let's see. All the Israelites did exactly what the Lord commanded, and on that very day, the Lord brought the Israelites out of Egypt by their divisions. And I'm assuming that's the same word that we had in Hebrew earlier.
Right. The different translations I've got. The JPS says ranks. The Friedman translation, which is that the
Exodus book.
No. The Bible with the Sources Revealed, the documentary hypothesis translation that Friedman did has masses. NIV has divisions. The NRV or the Revised Standard Version has companies, and then the ESV and the New Catholic Bible has hosts.
And the Hebrew says armies. So yet another translation of that word.
Which Hebrew or which one are you talking about?
I'm talking about the Jewish Bible on Shabbat.org.
Okay, well, because I've got the JPS and I.
Oh, you said the JPS. What does it say?
Ranks.
Okay, so this one actually, the one I'm looking at on Shabbat says legions. So another, just a similar word. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, let's see. Okay, so moving on to Exodus 13. This is you asked the question about the consecration of the firstborn, and I thought that was interesting because so the Lord does say to Moses, consecrate to me every firstborn male. The first offspring of every womb must among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal. And he mentioned that whether if it's a horse or donkey, you have to break its neck. If it's a shepherding animal, then you slaughter it, you slit its throat. One of the things that I asked, or one of the answers I got when I asked Reddit that question, how do we apply that to human offspring, is one person said that there is I forget the name of the person in the temple, but you go to temple and you basically say, hey, I have a newborn child, and you give them 5 ceremonial shekalim, and that is the consecration. You're basically buying their life from the Lord.
I think Rabbi Dennis mentioned that because you remember he said, and we edit this out, but he said you could go to the priest or whatever and say, I know this child is yours, but I really like him, so you can pay him. So
yeah, I think that's a neat thing. Okay, so he says, all right, you guys are leaving. And this is one thing that I find interesting is, once again, we have the intonation of the five peoples that are going to be in Canaan when the Israelites arrive. And that's the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites. They're going to be there, but I've already promised this land to you. So just know that this land of milk and honey is going to be contentious whenever you get there. Like, you know what I mean? So it says, do you have anything on that?
I was looking for something. I read that I was going to try to find it again in the Jewish translation because at one point the land that was supposed to be given to him goes from the Euphrates all the way to the Mediterranean.
Wow.
That doesn't exactly happen. So I was going to see what it said there and make a note of that for the next time I'm able to have a word with a rabbi about things. But
hopefully soon.
Yeah.
Okay,
anyway.
so it says, "Eat unleavened bread for these 7 days. Nothing with yeast in it is to be seen among you, nor shall any yeast be seen anywhere within your borders." Of course, like you mentioned with the rabbi, yeast is a modern interpretation of the word leaven, which is what the Hebrew Bible is saying.
Yeah, actually, I did a little looking into that. Let me see if I can find my note here. So I looked and I found I was looking to see when yeast would have been known as a thing, and not necessarily like we know that yeast, makes sourdough or whatever, but we know that yeast was intentionally added to dough to make it rise. And what I found is that it's been going on in Egypt for at least 4,500 years. So we're
Wow.
talking well before this event, whether you think it happened, when some people say it happened or not, or whatever, so it definitely would have been something that they would have had separate, that they would have known about. Again, I don't quite understand why you would make dough and not add the yeast at the beginning. Every recipe that I've seen, even when you're using a biga or something, you add it all at once.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah, it's almost as if they were prescribed to prepare their dough without yeast, because
Exactly.
you would almost have to. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, that if you want to make it a ceremony as a remembrance, sure, I have no problem with that. I'm not saying, it can't have been this way. I just,
Sure. No, that makes sense. And so then in 13:13 we get redeem with a lamb every firstborn donkey, but if you do not redeem it, break its neck. That's kind of what the rabbi was talking about earlier. When you break the necks of the horses or the horses or donkeys, you can also substitute a lamb according to this scripture, and then redeem every firstborn son. In days to come, when your son asks you, "What does this mean?" We're referring to the entire Passover, liturgy here. Say to him, "With a mighty hand, the Lord has brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. When Pharaoh refused to let us go, the Lord killed the firstborn of both people and animals in Egypt. This is why I sacrifice to the Lord the first male offspring of every womb and redeem each of my firstborn sons." Oh, dang it. I wanted to get to the Tefillin. And
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. There was just too much, dude. We had We had
Way
one
too
chapter
much.
to discuss, and it would have taken hours. It will be like a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead that the Lord brought us out of Egypt with his mighty hand. So you've heard of the Tefillin or the Tefillin, the prayer boxes. I wanted to know how, like, if that's truly a ritual that everyone still, prescribes to or subscribes to, because I've seen photos of it, but never have I actually heard a lot of, it being thrown around like in a parlance that I'm common with.
I looked into that a while back. I think it's more of an Orthodox thing. You see it a lot at the people actually praying at the Wailing Wall, and some of the more Orthodox communities in the United States I've seen do it. It's very interesting, and also it kind of sounds like the mark of the beast when we get further on into the New Testament and stuff, because the sign on your forehead or your hand.
Wow.
So I didn't think that was important to bring up with the rabbi because it's a Christian thing, but it is interesting that the similarity is there.
Yeah, for 100%. And like we were talking about retrojections, a lot of this stuff has to have been rescribed for like a Christian audience in order to fit a more a messianic narrative, right? So you have to kind of apply these meanings that not just a plain reading of the text, but even some of these layers upon layers of exegesis don't really permit. It's almost like you can say that this has to do with saviordom or messianic ideals, but that's not what anyone said before. And now suddenly that there's a Messiah, we get to ascribe these things with those meanings.
Well, and also in the beginning of Christianity, they didn't have a Bible. Like they had the Jewish, they had the Tanakh, but there wasn't a Christian, set of scriptures.
Of course.
And Paul was early, but we didn't have the Gospels or anything like that, and so there was plenty of time, at least a couple of decades, for these ideas to spread and coalesce and pick out the best parts
Oh
and
yeah.
and apply those to the text, and then create their own version of the scripture, the Second Testament.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of that's definitely you got to pick and choose and find illusions and things like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's an interesting point, because that's also one of the main criticisms of Christianity, or belief in general, but mainly in Christianity in this context, is you have so many contradictions, and that happens whenever you apply meaning to this and not to this, even though those two things seem very similar. Like, oh, that's neat. You say that the lamb in this context is representative of Jesus, or the Messiah, but here are all these other references to lambs being just fodder, or cast away, or whatever it is. You're like, well, how is that Jesus if that's the case, or whatever.
Well, and also I think I could be wrong about this, but I think the idea of what the Messiah was had a major overhaul when it came to trying to fit Jesus into it.
Oh yeah, definitely. And here I am expounding on something that I not like. The normal stuff that we talk about on every episode are things that I have no idea what we're talking about, and here I am talking about something I haven't even read anything about. So, but it's also interesting that he the rabbi mentioned the 4 gospels, but there are way more gospels. You know what I mean? Like, these are just things that have been committed to the canon,
right? Yeah, right.
And so that just means that to me, that who's to say? Imagine being the author of a gospel that was stricken. You're like, well, no, this is what I saw. Like, you can't just say, nope, sorry, Thomas, you admit too much that you're Jesus's twin. You're not allowed to be part of the canon. You're like, well, that's crap. Jesus told me I was his twin. He whispered something in my ear that I'm letting you know now. You're going to strike that because he only told me? Like, that's not fair,
Well, and also it's if you think about it, it was a committee, and they had all of these writings and all of these ideas, and they came together basically and said, went through everything, was like, okay, this is what comports to what we think is true. We made scripture rather than scripture being revealed. So, in one sense, you can take that that's what was meant to be, versus everything else, but it's all kind of the same in terms of, what you take from it, if it helps you or whatever.
Well, yeah, but even if you're willing to accept that last statement that you just made, then you don't even have to be a cynic. Just a base level of skepticism would help you understand that alone should be that's grounds for dismissal. Like, if
not grounds for dismissal necessarily, but grounds for it not being literal.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I'm willing to grant that. So when the Pharaoh let the people go, he didn't lead them through the road. He didn't lead them through Philistine country, because that, like we mentioned in the last episode, that road was based. There's a bunch of like army readouts, right? There's a bunch of it was a canal into Goshen that was fortified so that sea peoples or whatever, like armies from the north would be blocked off, or at least it would be defended from them. So had they gone that way, there would have been a little bit more belligerence when it came to their exit. So this is how we're explaining that. This is how we're explaining the route that they took. They don't want them to take the path that Jacob's sons took in negotiating the wheat during the famine.
It's a trade road. I mean, it's very,
populated. And so you should put some defenses up. I mean, why not? That's not a bad. That's a smart move. And so we're not going to go through the land. We're not going to go through Philistine country. For God said, if you face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt, ready for battle.
I don't think it was the Red Sea.
No, I completely agree.
Yeah,
this is what the scripture says.
Well, I think it's a mistranslation. Is supposed to be Reed Sea. Am I wrong?
Steve Reeds.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's how every biblical scholar that I've looked into interprets that. But for whatever reason, that's what the scripture says: Red Sea or Sea of Reeds. So what I'm curious about when it comes to that mistranslation is that because the words are so similar, red and reed, is the sea of reeds is named after the reeds that literally grow from the sea.
So,
right?
but that's the English. Is it? What about the Hebrew?
Right. No, I know.
Or Aramaic or whatever. Are the words that similar? I don't know.
Through all the translations, yeah, I couldn't tell you. That's strange, isn't it? That all those languages would have such similar translations that we wouldn't be able to narrow this down. You'd think the more opinions of this word that we have, the easier it would be to determine that. But I think because the Red Sea as we know it is so far to the east, it's between the Arabian Peninsula and Mesopotamia. That the Red Sea couldn't possibly be what we're talking about unless we wanted to move this entire story, to the east, out of Egypt. We'd have to move it out of Egypt for this to make sense. So I think it's a simple correction to like turn the Red Sea into the Sea of Reeds. Those words sound similar in English, but there's no way that's been mistranslated through the last few millennia, right?
Well, I think because they talk about going into Midian and Sinai and all of that, people just kind of assume it's supposed to be Red Sea. But it very easily, I mean, yes, they went that way, but they could easily have escaped them through a Reed Sea, closer to the Mediterranean or whatever, right, if it was dry enough. And I think that's where it is. Yeah.
You say that's where it is. Like, do you think it's the Reed Sea? It's the sea I think north of.
Well, I don't necessarily think that actual place is necessarily it. I'm just saying I think, as far as I can tell, the original should have been reed, and it was adapted to red because of this idea that they're heading east.
Gotcha.
And it's more of a spectacle if God is parting the waters in the Red Sea versus a shallower sea. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely. If I may, so the Hebrew Bible here and Rashi's interpretation of the Red Sea is red. I'm not sure what the Hebrew consonant is here, but it means a marsh where reeds grow, similar to "and it put into the marsh" from Exodus 2:3. So it's similar to the reeds that were mentioned whenever Moses was placed into the river. Mm-hmm. So that's the same. We're using that same consonant, reed, in 2:3. Right. To mean red here in 13, whatever we were, 18.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Very interesting. I don't know what to make of it except to say that it just makes more sense. Like if I wanted to make this make sense to me as I'm reading and like giving it as much credit as possible, I'm gonna have to say that it's a shallow bed, a shallow pool of water with reeds growing around the perimeter, right? Otherwise, Moses literally waves his hand and staff across the Red Sea.
Well, and that's why I think it should be red, the Red Sea. Now, I know I just said it should be reed. I think the original translations go more towards reed. But for me, if I'm going to take it as this, this mythic birthing of the nation of Israel, Red Sea is much more impressive. And just, I would leave it at that. Again, this is not a literal thing, so why can't it be? Make it more of a spectacle.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so I'm just going to finish off chapter 13. This is going to be the end of what we're discussing today. We're kind of out of the Passover, we're branching into the Exodus, which is where I want to pick up going forward. But I wanted to kind of give this I want to cap the episode saying that we're going to start with 14 with the next one. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay.
I did want to get into one thing with a chiasm. You can finish this if you want, and then I'll get to it.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so let me do 20 here. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By day, the Lord went ahead of them. The Lord went ahead of them as a pillar of cloud to basically guide them, and at night he led them by being a pillar of fire, and thus they were able to travel both day and night. That was the whole idea there. But interestingly, we have the Lord sort of like, becoming a physical entity with his presence as a cloud and as fire. But there was something else. I had a hang up here when I was reading this. Maybe it's at the beginning of the next chapter, but it says neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. So I guess my question would be, the Lord, despite having already, announced his presence as Adonai or, Yod-Heh Vov-Heh has already mentioned to Moses that he is the eternal. He is the one. He doesn't have to be there, and yet here he is. He hasn't spoken directly to the people yet, I don't think, but he will soon. He's going to appear to them whenever Moses comes down from the mount and sees the calf, the golden calf. He's going to speak to them, and we'll see that. Why are we still having a God trying to like physically manifest himself when the story is being established that he doesn't have to, despite having already done that in Genesis? Nothing but that in Genesis, I should say. And the fact that we've already established that he can speak to people and they won't die. Like, why is Moses still the arbiter of like who God is to these people?
I don't know the specifics of the area and the time, but it could be that there just was a general idea amongst all the peoples in the area that direct contact with a god would be fatal for you because they are so powerful. Mm-hmm. Just being in their presence is fatal. Mm-hmm. And he's proved that that's not necessarily the case, but they may have still felt that way.
They can feel that way up until God is willing to prove that wrong, right? And so why haven't we done that? That's kind of what I'm curious about. Yeah, that's strange, right? Like if they're scared to hear God's voice, why would they believe that Moses is able to do so, right? Except through all unless it's through all these wonders. Hey, look what I can do with my staff. Look what I can do to this water. Or just say, hi, it's me, God. You can do that. And now you don't have to become a pillar of cloud and fire, But
it was, I think that's more to guide them and not, like so you can see it from a distance kind of thing. There's going to be a lot of people front to back. True. Everybody knows which way to go here instead of just following the person in front of you, which can be dangerous, especially in the dark, in the wilderness, that kind of thing. So that's my interpretation of it.
That's a fair interpretation, but at the same time, even if he were to maintain his manifestation as a cloud of fire and a pillar of smoke or whatever, you can still, as an eternal God or whatever, that Moses can talk to, physically, still be like, hey, get in line. You can still be like, over here, you're going the wrong way, whatever. Yeah. So, okay, I'm just being a little snarky, but still.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's valid though.
Well, thank you. So I guess at this point, you said you wanted to go back to that chiasm in 13.
Yeah. So it's not exactly 13. So do you want to explain the chiasm again? I think technically it's chiasmus, but just explain what it is and why, and then I'll get to the specifics.
Like what the specific chiasm that you're referring to is, or what a chiasm is.
Chiasm in general and why it's important. Okay,
so a chiasm is it's a chiasmus is an X. It's essentially saying this is it's the imagery of the X is used to describe the point at which two pieces of text kind of come together in a central location. So an example of a chiasm is I'm not going to come up with anything off the top of my head.
Well, I've got one that I'm about to talk about. But
is it Exodus 12:15 through 20?
It is 40 to 51.
Okay, so let me discuss this one just as an example. So in Exodus 12:15 through 20, so you have 15 and you have 20. You have text in both of those verses. You work your way backwards to Exodus 12:17, and you get the central text. You get the thing that all of this text kind of reverts back to and aims for, and that middle section of text is given special meaning, or special meaning can be derived from it. So an example of this would be Exodus 15. In 12:15, verse 15, eat unleavened bread. Verse 20, eat unleavened bread. 16, first day, seventh day. 18, 14th day, 20th day. You work your way back to 17 and you get, in the self same day, I have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt, or your divisions out of the land of Egypt. So you are able to kind of like cross-reference all of those things back to a central location, and that a little bit extra meaning is given to, in this self same day, I have brought your divisions out of Egypt. And there are several of these chiasms that have been kind of like picked out throughout the text. You said you had one the one after that.
Yeah, I had one that I thought was very interesting because I bought that version of the Bible you're talking about with the sources revealed. This is the documentary hypothesis has been, there's lots of discussion about it, and I think it's pretty much gone the way of the dodo. There's a few people that still think it's important, and it might, still have some use to explain some things, but it's not where the scholarship is going.
I just want to hop in real quick before you get onto your point there. The direction the scholarship is going, I'm not sure if you've gotten to him yet, there's an author, amongst others, named Konrad Schmid. He's a Swiss author. He's a Swiss biblical historian or some person like that. And he's taken the documentary hypothesis and throughout and basically I don't know, he's part of a lineage of scholarship, but he is kind of considered the example of like where it is now. There's no longer a J and E source. There's the priestly sources and the non-priestly sources. So
right. Anyway, I was reading this and I noticed something I thought was very interesting. There's this chiasm supposed to be from Exodus 12:40 through 51, and it starts out, in 40 and 41, this the self same day, and then all the children of Israel, the ordinance, the circumcision, the foreigner, the house, and it goes, back the other way. And it only works according to this because this redactor from the Deuteronomy school of whatever inserted one line there at the end to make it work. And the center of that chiasm is thou shalt not carry forth out of the flesh abroad out of the house, neither shall you break a bone thereof. And I just thought that was really weird that somebody would insert that line to make this work, and then I don't understand the point of not taking the flesh out of the house and not breaking a bone.
Well, which verse was added by the Deuteronomist?
51.
Okay. Interesting. So the way the chiasm should work is if you were to strike 51, you would simply not include that first passage. You would simply not include 40, right?
That's true, I guess. Yeah.
So
yeah, I didn't think of that. That makes sense.
But there could be some significance to, like, there could be something like the self same day. Like we want to emphasize the fact that this all happened within the space of this time with this amount of precision, something like that. That could be why it was added. But I think the chiasm still would be
I didn't think of that. It makes sense, but I still don't understand why that one line is so important. We probably should have asked the rabbi about it.
It came to pass the self-same day that the Lord did bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. Yeah. I mean, again, who knows? It could just be that they wanted to emphasize that this thing did transpire as promised both in Exodus 12:40 and in 12:17.
But what I'm getting at is that center, the thing the chiasm is pointing to. I don't understand why it's so important. Why would you want to emphasize that? Yeah,
thou shalt not carry forth of the flesh abroad out of the house, neither shall ye break a bone thereof. Why is that important? If I had to ascribe meaning to it, it might be that this is an important part of what we should be doing henceforth.
I don't know. Maybe it's significant, to just reemphasize that the lamb is is for God. It's, you know what I mean? Like it's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. That could be it too. And also, if you think about it, like the rabbi was saying earlier, the things that get a ton of emphasis, the ones that are kind of like considered like, this is really God. You and I have talked about this several times on the podcast. It's when we get that reiteration that we understand that God is the one speaking and that God is the one kind of like saying, listen, I'm saying this again because I want to make sure you understand it. When it comes to a chiasm, again, this is a human creation. So it's almost a puzzle,
Right.
And it could be an etiology as well, but it's almost a way of emphasizing something without having to say it again. So all of these other parts of the chiasm get reiterated except for that middle section. And it's because it's in the middle that we ascribe meaning to it, or a special meaning to it.
Right.
I don't know. I personally find this stuff very interesting. It's neat that these things are kind of hidden in there, or something. These are things that on just a plain reading, you're not going to find it. in fact, it might come across as like kind of boring and staid. Like, why are you saying the same things over and over?
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought that was odd, and I want to bring it up, and it came to mind because I was, mistaken about. I didn't realize that the totally chiasm still totally works. I just thought it was odd that one line was put in to make the larger example.
Yeah, and man, like I said in text with you, I want one. I want one of those Bibles because I just want to see the text, like how it's all kind of like broken up. That's fun.
I mean, it was $20. I probably shouldn't have bought it. Like I said, I've got stacks of books everywhere.
It's hard. It's so hard. And
Yeah.
I bought the NIV Study Bible on Kindle because I'm like, well,
really?
I'm using the iPad. I really want this source, but it sucked so bad. It was so bad that I'm using the iPad for a lot of what I've been ever since we had that conversation about it. For a lot of what I'm doing now, note taking, reading, and stuff like that. But it hasn't removed the need for this thing. It's so big, and I have to take it everywhere because I need the notes. I need the footnotes that they put in there, and the Kindle version stunk so bad. You'd click on the reference, and sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. It would take you. It's not delineated by page. You would go to the footnote section of the book, and you're and so you're like searching around, like what verse was I on again, and then you'd have to scroll all the way back up. I was like, this stinks.
I also like back in the day when I was reading a lot on my Kindle, which I still, I've still got it and still using stuff, but like you would click on a link, and then whenever you would go back, it would take you, like it would shift the page.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so we made it to the end of 13 here of Exodus 13. I think that's a good spot to leave it off. Once again, to everyone who might be consuming this in its various forms, we wanted to say thank you. We're proud of the progress that we've made so far. But to have someone as esteemed as the rabbi that we had today, that's also very humbling and gratifying. And I wanted to issue another thank you to him. If anyone has any sources for us that might be good, please don't hesitate to let us know, either in the comments of whatever platform you're listening to this on, or you can email podcast.eatingtheapple@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you there. We appreciate you joining us on this episode today. So until next time, I'm Jeff.
I'm Chris.
And this has been Eating the Apple. Thank you.